get into this this famous passage, I want to share with you a story about a boy. A boy who was about teenage, started rebelling against his dad constantly. All the time, anything his dad told him to do, he went against it. They were fussing and fighting constantly. And well, the dad said to the boy, said, I want to show you what you're doing with your life. And I'm going to go out to a wooden post in our front yard, and I'm going to put nails all over that post. Every time that you have a word of rebellion or a rebellious act, I'm going to nail another nail into that post so you can see what this looks like. Well, the boy, of course, rolled his eyes. Isn't that the common rebellious phrase, is to do that? So he went on, and that boy said, I'm going to do everything I can to fill that post with as many nails as you can put in it. Isn't that rebellion? Yeah? Isn't that what that is? Well, he did do that. He filled that post up with nails. But there come a point in time where that boy genuinely felt repentant for how he was acting with his dad. And he came back to him and said, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm gonna stop this. And with true remorse, he came back to his father, started obeying him. And one by one, Dad, as he seen this, those nails had come out with each act of servitude and kindness and politeness and humility. Each one of those come out. Until finally one day, the very last nail come out of that post. And he went over to his boy and he's kind of smiling. His boy's looking at him, he's just bawling, crying. And he said, Son, why are you crying? He said, well, I look at that post and all the nails are gone, but all the holes remain. You know, rebellion has a cost, doesn't it? It has a cost. You know, the Father will forgive the rebellious heart. He will. He'll forgive the rebellion. But each one of those nails that go in that post, they're going to be there. You're going to have to deal with them. And that is the hurt of rebellion. And tonight here, we're going to look at the last story of primordial history. We've been going from Genesis 1 to Genesis 11, looking at all these things that are so controversial today, you might say. And finally, we come to the Tower of Babel. And this tower, it could be called the greatest monument there ever was to rebellion, because that's exactly what the Tower of Babel is. It was built on absolute rebellion to God. And in that same sense, what happened there in that rebellious act, we still deal with the holes of it today, don't we? With how we deal with people from other cultures, how we deal with people that don't speak the same language as we do. We deal with the holes that come from their rebellious act of building this tower. And I was thinking tonight, what does it look like? What do you build a tower of rebellion out of? You know, in this passage that we're going to look at, it talks about bricks, it talks about mortar, it talks about different things. But in your hearts, each one of us can build up a tower of rebellion to God. It says here, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Can you imagine that? And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, and they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. You may be seated. Now, the first thing I want you to see here is a common thing that a lot of atheists like to point out. Well, didn't it say in Genesis 10 that they already had separated? Now here in Genesis 11 it says they're separating again. Well, we've seen this as we went through Genesis 1 through 11. I hope you've seen it. That the Bible doesn't always go in chronological order. When I first picked up my Bible to read, I expected to read it just like any other book. That this would happen, and this would happen, and that would happen, and that would happen, you know, right in a line. That's not how it works in the Bible. Sometimes it goes back and forth, back and forth. It's like an episode of that old TV show Lost. You remember it? They always had the flashbacks. They always flash back to something that already happened. Well, that's the same thing you see here in Genesis 1 through 11. What's happening here actually begins in the middle of Genesis 10. It actually begins in the middle of Ham's line. You remember there were three sons of Noah that come off that ark. There was Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Well, look over here in Genesis chapter 10. It tells us about the man who got up this tower. It says, and Cush, this is one of Ham's line, begat Nimrod. And he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now listen to this, verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Nimrod was the head of the Tower of Babel. So get that in your mind. There's this man that's in control. Another thing you need to notice here is there was a command. You have to go all the way back to Genesis 9:1 to see the command that was given. The command was this, and God blessed Noah and his sons. And he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Replenish the earth. Now, in Genesis chapter 11, at the end of verse 4, it says that they're going to go build this tower, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. That is an absolute sense of rebellion, right? We're not going to replenish this earth. What are we going to do? We're not going to be scattered upon the face of the whole earth, right? We're going to make our stand right here in this little tiny area where we are at. Now, there's not a one of us that likes for someone to be over us. You ever notice that? People just do not like for someone to be over them. I've even heard people say it. I don't have to listen to nobody but God himself, right? Have you ever heard that? I'll not listen. Now, here's the funny thing about that, though. When they say I don't have to listen to nobody but God himself, their God thinks a lot like they do. He always likes all the things they like. He always dislikes all the things they dislike. He always goes along with all the things that they want to do. Makes me wonder if their God isn't them, right? If your God is always telling you to do things that you always think is right in line, if he's not challenging you with anything you're doing, you might want to recheck your possibilities there. I don't think you're following the one true God, because when I go into the Bible and I meet up with God and I see him, sometimes he asks me to do things that scare me, that cause me to think, well, my goodness, if I go out and I step out in that such a way, I might get myself into some real trouble. You know, if I speak in this way or I say that thing in this crowd, you know, these people are going to look at me funny. Surely my God wouldn't ask me to do that. But he does, right? And I find that if you want to build a tower of rebellion in your heart, the first brick is a brick of mistrust. Mistrust. I don't trust my leader. I don't trust my God. I say he's God. I say he's the leader, but I don't trust him. Once there was a woman, and she liked to feed the birds during the winter. Now, the birds during the winter, as you all know, it's harder for them to find food. And she would take out, she'd throw her bird seed out across the snow for all the birds to come up to it. She said she stepped out on that porch, she flung these handfuls of crumbs, and she sat there and she waited for the birds to come. But you know what the birds didn't do? They didn't come. Why? Because even though that woman was trying to do something good for them by giving them something to eat, they didn't necessarily trust that woman. So those birds were sitting out here, starving to death, without any food, because they mistrust the provision being given to them. Folks, how many times have you mistrusted God and missed out on a blessing? Now, that woman, she said this. She said, as I watched and waited, it seemed to me that I could get God's viewpoint more clearly than ever before. He offers, he plans, he waits, he hopes, longs for all things for our good, but he has to wait and watch as we stand out there wanting to come out to him. How many of y'all have not stepped out for God because you in your heart say, I can't do that? But God said you can. Remember Moses at the burning bush? Remember that? He had all sorts of excuses, didn't he? I can't go down there and speak to them people. Don't you know I can't talk? I can't speak to those people. Well, I'll have Aaron do it for you. But I can't go. They'll laugh at me. They'll all these different things. Why was Moses being rebellious? Because he didn't trust God. Here was a God who had just made a bush burn in front of him.
this is a miraculous event right here before him. He knew this. He took the shoes off his feet. He walked up there, and this miraculous event that caused the bush to burn right in front of him, it says, you go do this. And then, what incredible rebellion to look in your heart and say, I can't do that. God just made a bush burn in front of him that will not burn up. God just spoke to him from that bush. And in his little tiny heart, his mistrust, I can't do that. You can do that. If God says you can do that, you can do it. And it's a rebellious act to sit back and not step out and do what God has told you to do. Do you understand that? It's not like, well, I'm just making my... No, I'm rebelling against God because God has clearly showed me what I need to do, right? You are in rebellion against God. And it all starts from that little tiny brick of mistrust. I'll not trust you, God. Now, why are these people building this tower? This towering temple just a few generations after they had went through this worldwide flood. Now, many people think, I think it was because they had a wrong view of God. You see, in just a few generations as they grew up, they'd only heard about a God who had destroyed the entire world with a great flood, and they were the only ones left. Nobody had probably explained to them how loving He was. What if He does that again? What if He comes and He floods the whole earth again? When you get the wrong picture of God and who God is, then you're going to be in rebellion against Him. When you hear that God destroyed the world just a few generations from you here, as these people had done, that sounds bad, doesn't it? I'm kind of scared of that God. We ought to get some provisions up to take care of ourselves here. This God could do that again, right? There is a thing that I've read about that Indians do with their 13-year-old boys to prove they're a man. After they've learned how to hunt, after they've learned how to do all sorts of different things, they take them out in the middle of the woods, out from the security of their family and their tribe, and they take them out there for the reason of making them into a man. They stay all night in the woods by themselves. And that sounds mean, doesn't it? I can't imagine taking one of my boys and putting them out in the woods all night by themselves with no shelter, nothing to protect themselves or anything like that. That sounds odd, right? But that bad situation has a purpose. A lot of times, the father of that boy will go off to the side and he'll be there throughout the entire night watching over that boy as this takes place. Now, the boy doesn't know that, right? Sometimes, God will take you and He'll put you in a situation that you don't like, right? He'll put you in a place where it's disturbing and it doesn't... He seems mean to have told me to do this. It seems wrong that He would say that I'm supposed to do this, right? And it seems mean, but the whole time He's watching over me, trying to teach me a lesson. Trying to teach you a lesson. How many of y'all have been through something like that before? Where you have went through a time where, God, why? Why am I going through this? This is awful. But He is standing there, just like that Indian father, watching over the son, protecting you through the situation. But through this time, we learn to trust our God and create relationship with our God. It's the same way with our relationships with our family and with our friends. It all is based on trust, isn't it? It's trusting one another. The same thing is here with God. And what causes our rebellion is first this idea of mistrust. And I believe these people, they believe that they would build a tower for a reason. Why would I build a tower that goes up to the heavens? Because I'm scared there's a God who's going to flood this whole earth again. Even though He made a promise He wouldn't do it. Even though He said, I'm not going to flood the earth again. I make you this promise, there'll be a rainbow in the clouds that'll come up after all these times. I'm not going to do this again. Yet here I'm going to build a big... I've got to take care of myself. I've got to take care of myself. I can't just trust that God's going to do it for me, right? So, we build our tower. We build our tower to protect us against God, as if that could ever happen, right?
We build our tower to protect us against anything that could ever happen. We build a tower to take us away from everyone else, away from God Himself, thinking that I've got everything under control. It's like the rich man. He built up all these different barns. He put all his wealth in all these barns, and he did not know that his soul was required of him that very night, right? Trusting in the physical things rather than trusting in what God has said. So, if you want to build up a tower of rebellion, you definitely start with mistrust. And the next thing it goes to is pride. Look at verse 4 here. And they said, go to, let us build us listen to this. Listen to the eyes in this. Let us build us. I mean, how close can you get talking about yourself, right, Fud? Let us build us a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Did you hear what he said? Let us make a name for ourselves. Now, D.A. Carson, he once said this: hell is not a place where people are consigned because they were pretty good blokes, but they just didn't believe the right stuff. He says they're consigned there first and foremost because they defy their Maker and want to be at the center of the universe. And who persist in their God-defying rebellion, what is God to do? We want to make a name for ourselves. This is the calling card of our generation today. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be heard. It's all the time showing me every different thing about myself. I mean, we go on and we show people everything today because, I mean, it's just amazing how much we want to lift ourselves up. I mean, social media has been like a cancer for that, right? I mean, it's constantly showing this and that. Not that there's anything wrong with seeing all these things. It's fun to see what's going on with your family and friends. Have you ever seen that friend who he'll show you, this is what the bed looked like when I went to bed tonight. This is what the door looked like when I walked out the door this morning. This is what the car looks like. This is what my sandwich looks like today. This is what my other sandwich looked like. I mean, it's just like a play-by-play. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. But think about it. Do we often just want to put ourselves up all the time? Christians are to be concerned with God's glory, not their own. And all of the false religions of the world are going to come out from the Tower of Babel. Do you realize that? All of the arrogant false religions that say that I can do this. What did I just say? Let us make us. Let us make us. Let us make us. You go to all these different religions. Hinduism, let us make us. Islam, let us make us a prayer. Let us make us. It's over and over again. You do it. You do it. You are the one who is creating the relationship with God. God doesn't create the relationship with you. You don't receive it by grace, humbly. You are the one who has to do the works to bring God into you, right? That's the idea of all the false religions that will go out from this place here in that day. And so when God breaks this crowd up, it's kind of odd. Each will take their version of that flood story across the world. You can go today and you can go all over the world and there's different versions of this flood story that's told. You can go all over the world and there's different ideas of that. And they'll each take also their understanding of God. And that's why all the different religions will go out to all the world. So the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Rebellion here, is built with mistrust. It is built with pride. And most of all, it's built with unrestraint. Now, this is a hard one to get, folks. Look at verse 5 here. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Now, at first glance, it would seem here that God is trying to stifle human productivity, right? You look at that and you say, is God scared about what mankind's going to do? When I was younger, I'd read that and I thought, was that what's going on there? That doesn't make sense. You know how dumb that is? God is scared that man can build a tower up to heaven. You know, there were people back in the 60s all upset that they were going to go out into space. They were going to go out into space, and there was an arrogant, prideful one who did go out into space, one of the Russians. He said he was up there and floating around in space. He says, I'm up here and I don't see a God anywhere, right?
Somebody once flippantly said, well, if you step out of that spacesuit, you'll see him real quick. Right? That's the idea, folks. We think that we can raise ourselves up to these high and mighty places. But God is looking at these people, and the concern here is that they're not restraining themselves. Look what it says again. Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them. Nothing will be restrained from them. They will completely destroy themselves if they continue on this act of pride, this act of mistrust, this act of rebellion. It's going to destroy them. And we think that people are just supposed to have freedom to do whatever, right? They should just have freedom to do whatever. If you have freedom like that, you're going to destroy yourself. There has to be some sense of restraint in your life, or you will just completely bury yourself in the ground. He says this because he knows that if humanity lives in an unrestrained attitude, they will most certainly destroy themselves. There are 7 fruits of the Spirit. 7 different fruits of the Spirit. And that's the idea of different, I like to think of them like strengths that God gives you through the Holy Spirit. He gives you these 7 different ones. Well, the very last one is a word called temperance. And the idea of that is self-control. Self-control, that I am in control of myself. You know, we live in America. And in America, they tell you you have freedom, right? You have freedom to go do this and freedom to go do that. But with that idea of freedom, restraint is a blessing. If I go to a drug addict and I tell that drug addict that you need to stop this, you need to show some restraint, right? You're going to destroy yourselves if you don't hold back from that. I tell him he needs help. Will he ever think he needs to be restrained? No. If I go to someone with anger issues and I tell you, you've got anger issues, you need to restrain those anger issues, you need to deal with those problems, they're going to look at me and say, I don't need to be restrained. This is just who I am. Right? If I go up to someone filled with pride and I tell them you've got pride issues, you need to deal with this situation. I'm coming to tell you this because I love you. They're not going to look at me and think that I'm there to give them help. They'll say, well, my pride helps me. It gives me help. I don't think I need to be restrained. I don't think there's one time that any of us think at times that we need to be restrained. But the fact is we do. Thank God that God stops us when we're out in this world and we're about to destroy ourselves. I am very thankful that I was driving home half drunk one night. Not thankful that I was half drunk, but I was thankful that they pulled me off the side of the road. They had me go through a year of DUI and go through all these things and learn that I didn't need to be doing that, right? Why? Because if I'd have kept down that path, what would I have done? I would have destroyed myself. God sent them there that day to catch me in my sin and stop me. Unrestraint. Unrestraint. We need that restraint or we will destroy ourselves. What causes a tower of rebellion? Mistrust, pride, and unrestraint. Now, how does God end rebellion? Because God's always going to end rebellion, isn't He? There's no doubt about that. Look at verses 7 through 9. He says here, let us go down. Now, isn't that interesting? You know, God is one God, right? Right here you see the Trinity right there. Let us go down. And there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. How does God deal with rebellion? He leaves a remnant. He leaves a remnant. A small little part left that believed. You know, they had wanted to make a name for themselves, and now they couldn't even pronounce one another's names. Do you ever think about that? They couldn't even say them now. They had wanted to ensure that they wouldn't be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But isn't that what went ahead and happened? And this is where mistrust, pride, and unrestraint leads to. But folks, the beauty of this is God doesn't give up. You know, I started out talking tonight about a young boy. A rebellious young boy. I'm going to end tonight with a young girl. There was a young girl, same situation with her mother.
big rebellion. Oh, she was in a rebellious stage. She didn't want to hear a word she had to say. And Mom had to go pick her up from a place that she shouldn't have been at. Mom went up to the door to go get her, got her in the car, took her out there, sat her down, and Mom had this little tiny box. She handed the box to her daughter. The daughter looked at it and said, "What's this for?" And her mother simply said, "Read the card." The girl looked at it, she rolled her eyes back in her head. "What's this for?" "Read the card." And so tears began streaming down her cheeks as she reached out to embrace her mom. The card said this: "This rock is a little more than 6,000 years old, and that's how long it'll take before I give up on you." Our God does not want to give up on us. Our God does not want to give up on us. And if you'll follow this down from verse 10 all the way down to verse 32, you'll see one of those family lines. You'll see Shem's family line run all the way down to a man called Abraham. Abraham. And he will give a promise here to Abraham in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. He'll tell him that out of him will come a great nation. And through that great nation, all the families of the earth will be blessed. You know why all the families of the earth will be blessed because of righteous Abraham? Because Jesus will come through Abraham's line. He'll come through Shem's line. God had a plan that He was going to bring Christ through that holy line all the way to the end. All the way to the end where Jesus would come and He would institute this church. And here where He takes all the nations of the world and He messes all their languages up. He separates them out across the entire plain. What does He do when the church begins? What does He do the first day of the church? Acts 2, 6 through 8. The multitude came together and were confounded because that every man heard them speak in his own language. God brought the language back, didn't He? Just as much as He can bring confusion into a crowd, He can just as well bring a sense of bringing everyone together again. And that's what our God does. That's what a church is supposed to do. It's not supposed to be a place of rebellion. It's supposed to be a place of unity, of order, of love, of a family coming together where we're all speaking some weird languages. There's some strange things sometimes come out of some people's mouth. But the truth is, we're all going to hear it through the Holy Spirit, right? Hear it through our God's Word. Folks, are you living in a tower of rebellion tonight? Are you in a place where you've just been rebelling against God so long that you just like to lay that burden down? You know, I believe at any point in time before God decided to come down here, they could have quit this. They could have stopped this. They didn't have to go through this. But so often we choose to keep on building the bricks up. The brick of mistrust, that brick of pride, that brick that moves you on in to the place where the judgment comes. You don't have to be in that place here tonight.